The late 18th century saw the establishment of numerous so-called friendly societies throughout England and Wales to provide additional economic security to working people and their families. As described by historian Dot Jones, these societies, also called benefit clubs, were voluntary associations open to anyone who could pay the required contributions, whose purpose was, quote, to provide weekly relief to members out of work on account of sickness or infirmity, and a lump sum at death. Before the widespread availability of health insurance or public assistance, such benefits offered vital support to families who had lost a breadwinner's income to illness, injury, or death. Jones has identified two types of friendly society: autonomous, locally organized friendly societies and affiliated orders, which emerged in the early 19th century. Such organizations included the Oddfellows and the Ancient Order of Foresters, which imitated Masonic practices in their ceremonies and in degrees of membership. These larger organizations had access to greater funds and could provide more benefits than the local societies. Unique among these orders was the American Order of the Philanthropic Order of True Ivorites, the only one founded in Wales and which operated in the Welsh language. Trying to get this to, here we go. The order was established in Wrexham by Thomas Robert Jones, a shoemaker, in 1836, named after Ivor Hael, or Ivor the Generous, the patron of the 14th century poet Dafydd ap Gwilym, to whom Dafydd composed numerous poems recognizing his generosity. The Ivorites not only provided financial support for members and their families, but also sought to promote and safeguard the Welsh language. Their motto summarized the ideals toward which they strived: Cyfaill garwch, cariad a gwirionedd, friendship, love, and truth. Ivorite lodges were soon established throughout Wales, with 16 in Glamorgan alone by 1865. And I should note that the order really took off in the industrial South Wales, The Ivorite order soon found a foothold in Welsh immigrant communities in the United States. The first Ivorite lodge in the United States was founded in Pittsburgh in 1848, and additional lodges were soon established throughout Pennsylvania and beyond, bearing the names of important figures from Welsh history or legend, or ones that invoked ideals of Christian charity. The lodges operated similarly to those of other fraternal organizations, with initiation rituals, secret handshakes, and degrees of membership. The Urdd y Gwir Ivoriaid Americanaidd, the Order of American True Ivorites, codified its rules in a constitution in 1869. Books containing the rituals and procedures of the Ivorites in both Welsh and English have survived. These include instructions on how to institute a new lodge, as well as scripts for the installation of officers and the initiation of new members. According to one such rule book published in the early 20th century, there were 3 degrees: the blue or first degree, the white or second degree, and the golden or third degree. There were also eventually degrees especially for women, named Naomi and Blodwen, for example, as well as a young men's lodge. These ranks and procedures added a sense of exclusivity and honor to membership. We have one book which includes much of the text even concealed in code, although fortunately we also have the code handwritten by a member of the Madoc Lodge in Chicago. And these are items which we have in the archive for Welsh America in Wymore, Nebraska. These were generously donated to us, and I'd like to thank I believe Dilys Rana, who was in the audience here, had a hand in getting those to us. And a lot of what I'll be drawing from in my talk today comes from the records of the Madoc Lodge. Membership of the Ivorites was limited to men and eventually women judged to be of good character. Prospective members and their wives, if married, had to be between the ages of 16 and 50 and in good health, requirements which no doubt sought to limit the payment of benefits and prevent the depletion of funds. Each lodge appointed a research committee to investigate each prospective member and ensure their qualifications. I should also add that one question I had when I gave this presentation at the North American Festival of Wales last year was how much did people pay to be members? And that's actually something I've struggled to find a definite answer on. Even looking through the records that I've been studying. But I did find a an article in the Drych which mentioned that the cost was just a few cents a month. So I think that we can say with some confidence that it was not terribly expensive to be a member of the Ivorites. That probably the dues fluctuated based on time over time and based on location. And as that article indicated, it was probably a small fee of a few cents every month that were invested into the fund. Within a few decades, the Ivorites had grown substantially in American Welsh communities. According to a report of the Ivorites' annual meeting at Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania in May 1877, the order was flourishing, with 44 lodges in Pennsylvania, New York, Ohio, and Vermont. The board also elected a new president, T. Solomon Griffiths, a prominent merchant, author, and editor in Utica, New York. The outgoing Uwchlewydd, or Grand President, Benjamin Hughes of Hyde Park, Scranton, was presented with a portrait of himself. This painting may in fact be the recently restored portrait of Hughes, which is preserved at the Great Plains Welsh Heritage Centre, and that we see that portrait of Benjamin Hughes. Historian Bill Jones has called Hughes one of the most important men in late 19th century Scranton. A native of Breconshire, he immigrated to the United States in 1848 and became supervisor of the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western Railroad Company's diamond coal mine in Hyde Park, Pennsylvania in 1855. By 1890, he was responsible for supervising 7,000 mine workers. Hughes was also a fierce promoter of his fellow countrymen, both in the workplace and in Scranton, and among his many endeavors was the establishment of the city's first Ivorite lodge, Teml Ivor Hael, in 1867. The participation of Welsh leaders like Hughes enhanced the order's reputation, which rested on the character and generosity of its members. News from the Ivorites frequently appeared in Drych, particularly declarations of sympathy and mourning for members who had passed. In 1878, for example, the Blodeuyn Cariad, Flower of Love Lodge in Minersville, Pennsylvania, resolved in response to the sudden death of member Vaughan Morgans that, quote, we sympathize deeply with the family distressed after losing, without warning, such a beloved husband, sober and devoted father, and worthy Christian. The lodge added that its charter would be dressed in black, presumably a ribbon or cloth draped over the framed certificate for 30 days, as a symbol of our grief for our departed brother. The Ivorites also organized funeral processions for their deceased members and placed flag holders at their grave sites in some places. This example comes to us from the Vermont or New York Slate Valley district and was provided, by Janice Edwards of the Welsh Genealogical Society, and and a representative, of course, who's with us today in the audience here, a representative of the heritage, the Welsh heritage of that district. The Ivorites also made news by demonstrating their commitment to the Welsh language and sponsoring Eisteddfodau and other events in many communities. For example, in 1878, the Ivorites of Utica, New York, held a St. David's Day dinner, in honor of which Cynwal, or W.C. Jones, composed the following verse incorporating the principles of Ivorism. Cawninau eleni gyd ddallu gyd gwildewi, dan faner iforiaeth y daethom i'r cwrdd. Calonnau brwdfrydig a gwledd fendigedig, mae braster Amerig yn hilio ein bwrdd. Mae llaw cyfeillgarwch yn estyn croesawiad, gwirionedd a chariad sydd yma'n cael, ei doen i weithrediad, a chyflawn ddatblygiad, deilynga cymeriad hen lys I forhael. This year we celebrate St. David's Day together. Under the banner of the Ivorites, we come to the meeting with enthusiastic hearts and a splendid feast. America's abundance furnishes our table. The hand of friendship extends a welcome. Truth and love are here. Put into practice, and truth and love are here put into practice, and the full result is worthy of the court of Ivor Hael. On Christmas Day, 1888, the Ivorites of Pittsburgh held an Eisteddfod for, quote, a large crowd of the Welsh of Allegheny County. Typical of most American Eisteddfodau at the time, it was primarily a Welsh language event with a sprinkling of English. The day's nostalgic and patriotic Welsh songs included Yn Iach I Ti Gymru, Farewell Wales, and Gogoniant I Gymru, Glory to Wales, while Joseph Parry's Myfanwy was the song chosen for the tenor solo contest. There was also a nosgan, or serenade competition, featuring participants from around the city, such as the 14th Ward Minstrels, John Lewis and his party from the South Side, and Captain W.R. Jones' Glee Club from Braddock. The Soho Choir and South Side Choral Union competed in singing Then Around Round About the Starry Throne, with Soho taking the $100 prize. There were also poetry and recitation contests. There was only one entrant, Daniel A. Morgan, in the speech contest on the subject of the English language uprooting Welsh in American churches. But unfortunately, his effort was judged, quote, unsuccessful. The Eisteddfod, however, was considered a great success for drawing large and thriving audiences, according to a correspondent in a Drych named Critic, who added that the committee and the lodge are to be congratulated. A poetic address given by the local bard Gwyndaf at the opening of the Eisteddfod praised the Ivorites as sustainers of the Welsh ethnic community and suggested that it was in America that the movement's promise would be fulfilled. Ac yn Amerig y cawn ei mawredd, yn ymdeini a magu edmygedd, dywaid y gweiniaid am rad ogonedd, ei chroddion hylon a rhin ei heiledd, I wan tlawd a lwiant wledd, yn gyson, yma o galon, I ymgeledd. Gyda llwyddiant a noddant lenyddiaeth, hen wlad y delyn lawn led y dalaeth, a'i cenedlgarol swynol wasanaeth, fyd egni hudol I ddadganiaeth, I ddedwydd adroddiadaeth, roddant fawl a nerth haiddawl I ddawn yr eithyddiaeth. And in America, they will have their greatness, expanding and nurturing admiration. The servants speak of the gracious honor of their generous gifts and their principle of generosity. For the impoverished, they provide a feast, always from the heart for the sake of kindness. With success, they nurture the literature of the old country of the harp across the state, and their patriotic and delightful service gives enchanting energy to song. To successful recitation, they give praise, and worthy strength to eloquence. Despite their role as representatives of the Welsh ethnic community, unlike other institutions, the Ivorites avoided embroiling themselves in political and religious controversies, although some took this principle more seriously than others. In early 1900, the Maddock Lodge in Chicago was sharply critical of their fellow Ivorites for making a fairly anodyne statement about the conflict in the Philippines. They wrote, "We disapprove of the New York Convention's introduction of this resolution, that we are in sympathy with the government in its present crisis in its relations with the Philippine Islands and truly wish that matters will come to a satisfactory arrangement soon. The Madoc Lodge explained, "We will not suffer any religious or political arguments to take place in our lodges, and we judge the above to be contrary to our rules." Although it is perhaps worth considering that the Welsh Chicagoans' objection may itself have been a political statement, or at least expressed some discontent with the substance of the convention's resolution. By 1893, there were 33 Ivorite lodges in the United States. Fewer than in the 1870s, but they were more geographically widespread. The majority were in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and New York, with one in Vermont. In addition, Chicago was home to the Madoc Lodge, and Denver to Cyfrinfa'r Mynyddau Creigiau, the Rocky Mountain Lodge. The largest, with 187 members, was the Llywar Chen Lodge in the slate quarrying community of Granville, New York. The national membership numbered 2,229, and the order valued its property and funds at more than $50,000, equivalent to $1.8 million today. The Ivorites had also donated more than $16,000, which is equivalent to $600,000 today, in sick benefits, burial costs, and other charity. An 1895 editorial in Drych noted that the Ivorites were, quote, "weak in comparison to other orders of the same kind, but not so weak considering the number of Welsh people in the United States, and especially the number of those who are in reach of lodges and can join, and those who can meet the requirements if they wish to join." Also in 1895, Rhys Morgan of Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, who would soon serve as Uwchlewydd, or Grand President, proudly wrote in Drych that "our nationality has no other kind of philanthropic society that has contributed so much charity and sympathy than the Ivorite Society." He added that the Welsh churches had also done more toward this aim than will long be remembered. However, Morgan claimed that it was the Ivorites who had, quote, "collected and paid out the greatest sums to charity from the beginning until now." Indeed, Morgan had much to take pride in, for even if the number of Ivorites was relatively small, their influence in many Welsh-American communities was considerable. Another editorial the same year praised the Ivorite Convention in Wilkes-Barre for bringing together Welshmen from across the United States to serve a common purpose. I quote, "One of the delightful features of the Ivorite Convention was seeing patriotic Welshmen from different parts of the country meeting together to address matters related to the comfort and happiness of the Welsh in the United States. Representatives from Denver and Chicago meeting representatives from New York and Vermont, and brothers from Ohio and Pennsylvania demonstrated the spirit which is happy to sacrifice something to maintain our unity as a nationality scattered throughout the United States." For almost half a century, the American True Ivorites had proven themselves to be faithful servants of Welsh America. By the 1890s, however, Drych had expressed concern that Ivoriaeth, or Ivorism, was losing ground in Wales, as well as America. While there was much truth to this, the order still had decades ahead of it on both sides of the Atlantic. Again, the records of the Madoc Lodge, number 55, of Chicago in the first decades of the 20th century, even if rather matter-of-fact, provide a glimpse of a thriving organization that continued to serve its members and operate through the medium of Welsh, a testament to the Chicago Ivorites' commitment to their principles. For example, we have on February the 26th, 1900, "Derbyniodd y cais am glafdal oddi wrth y brawd David Jones a thalwyd y swm dyledus iddo." An application for sick pay was received from Brother David Jones, and he was paid his due. This was one of thousands of entries over the years recording sick pay to members. From September the 28th, 1903, we have "Darllenwyd adroddiad y Bwyllgor Ymchwiliadol a Chleidleisiwyd yn ffafriol ar yr ymgeisydd R.H. Roberts." The report of the research committee was read with a vote in favor of candidate R.H. Roberts. Like all Ivorite lodges, the Maddock Lodge had the authority to contact other lodges to assist members who had moved away from Chicago. As the November 23rd, 1903 meeting, at the November 23rd, 1903 meeting, a resolution was passed instructing the secretary to write to New York to, quote, look into the needs of brother Owen Hughes and provide him with $10 if needed. From January the 17th, 1910, we have the entry Pasiwyd I gael directory o enwau pob aelod a'i gyfeiriad. It was passed to make a directory of every member's name and address. On August the 18th, 1913, a note said, it has been made known that the convention was given authority to the lodges to no longer wear badges in the lodge. It was passed that the lodge will still wear badges. It was passed that the leader is to find out how many badges are needed and to report it at the next meeting. Throughout the Maddock Lodge record books, in addition to these resolutions to pay out assistance, there are declarations of sympathy for widowed families, lists of new members and elected officers, and even cultural activities. Immediately after the procedural discussion about badges, which I just read, for example, the records note, Cafwyd cyfarfod amrywiaethol, caneuon ac areithia gan y brodyr. We had a meeting full of variety with songs and speeches by the brothers. Going back to November 1903, R. Trevor Jones gave a speech on the subject, A oes gan anifail reswm? Does an animal possess reason? And in true Eisteddfodic fashion, the lodge held a, quote, impromptu speech competition of which no one was considered worthy of the prize. In 1917, the American Ivorites proudly celebrated 50 years at their annual convention in New York City. Board Secretary John O. Thomas of the Gronwy Lodge in Utica, New York, the Gronwy Lodge in Utica, New York, gave an address on the history of the movement, which was subsequently published as a booklet. Thomas also compiled the Ivorites' financial history from 1876 and noted that the combined capital of all 21 extant lodges totaled $74,039.57, almost $2 million today. The new century also saw women taking on a larger role in the organization, reflecting their increased participation in public life. At the 1893 convention, the Ivorites had established the Gradd Naomi, or the Naomi degree, and women's lodges soon followed as counterparts to the male lodges, similarly named after legendary Welsh or biblical women such as Ceridwen, Gladys, Esther, and Ruth. Whereas the founders and leaders of the order whose portraits graced Thomas's history were all men, both sexes were also almost equally represented in the group photograph of the 1917 convention. And just to go back to that image of that 1917 convention. Okay. All right. I have a question. Are people seeing slides? If you can put that in the chat, if one person said they didn't see slides changing, which is concerning. You are seeing slides? Yes? Okay. I'd had a long period where the slides were not changing, and my apologies, that might have thrown everybody off. Great. Back to the talk. By 1920, the order was still thriving, and some Ivorite lodges had quite a revival. Sorry, just a second here. I'm going to move my. All right, here we go. Sorry for the interruption there. By 1920, the order was still thriving, and some Ivorite lodges had quite a revival, adding substantial numbers of new members. including lodges such as Goronwy in Utica, Madoc in Chicago, Elined of the same city, Glyndŵr of New York, Llywarchen of Granville, Dyfed in Rome, New York, Seren, Cymru, and Newcastle, Pennsylvania, and so on, according to a report on the annual convention published in Drych. Throughout the 1920s, Drych records annual national conventions as well as regular updates on the activities of various Ivorite lodges. In the next decade, however, the outlook for the Ivorites had dimmed in no small part due to the Great Depression. As Grand Secretary Daniel Hughes wrote in the 1935 annual report, which notably was published in English, considerable time has been spent during the past months in trying to sell Ivorism in cities where at present no Ivorite lodge exists. We all realize that it would be a major task to organize a new lodge during this critical period in the history of the country. However, some lodges remained optimistic. William Jones of Chicago described the Madoc Lodge as a very interesting lodge to belong to, and our brothers are among the best. He continued, "We are having very good attendance at our lodge meetings. We have entertainments, often through our social committee, a question to discuss or translation from Welsh to English, a spelling bee on Welsh words, etc. Madoc Lodge joins with Elined Lodge in many activities. Our lodge has suffered because of the Depression like many other lodges, but we are still optimistic." John Hewson Jones of the Glyndŵr Lodge in New York City identified a major cause of the Ivorites' declining membership in the annual report of the 1950 convention. "At present," he wrote, "we have no circle from which we can expect new prospects to increase our membership, because there are no Welsh immigrants as of old." Nevertheless, Jones was proud that all the transactions of the lodge meetings are still carried on in vigorous Welsh. The Ivorites struggled to sustain their numbers as the generation of Welsh-Americans raised in the early 20th century passed on. By 1965, it was reported that the total American Ivorite membership numbered 434, and it had dropped by 30 since the previous year. Nevertheless, Mary Downing of Rome, New York, wrote that the 15 or so ladies of the Cerridwen Lodge remained very active in local philanthropy. As Ivorite sisters, we try to bring some measure of cheer to our sick and shut-in members. We also contribute with our limited means to various good causes in our community. By the mid-20th century, the availability of health and life insurance also obviated the need for one of the initial purposes of the organization, although records indicate that the Ivorite lodges continued to disburse funds to their members for medical expenses and death benefits well into the order's final decade. In 1970, Robert T. Williams, secretary of the Madoc Lodge, wrote that our lodge attendance has dwindled down to 5 or 6 faithful members. That year, only 5 lodges remained active, along with 9 inactive lodge funds. In 1974, the Grand Lodge was legally dissolved, and all lodge funds were distributed to the remaining members. What then is the legacy of the American Ivorites? Looking back at their origins, we can understand how they fulfilled an immediate need for immigrants and formed a network of lodges that connected Welsh communities, predominantly in urban or industrial centres. They also helped to maintain a sense of Welsh-American identity and nurtured Welsh culture, although they were ultimately superseded by more inclusive activities. However, in 2006, the North America Wales Foundation revived the order in the form of an annual award that recognizes individuals and institutions whose activities bring honor to the overall Welsh tradition and heritage, especially activities exemplifying the motto of the first Ivorites: friendship, love, and truth. I will end with the words of W.T. Williams of Utica, New York, in honor of Lewis Roberts, whose 80th birthday was celebrated at the Goronwy Lodge in 1943. Fe welodd werth Ivoriaeth pan oedd ef dipyn iau, a thystia yw ragoriaeth, tra'n para yw mwynhau. Mae nerth I gyfeillgarwch fel derwyn yn y coed, a thyfu o na mewn harddwch yn 40 oed. He saw the value of ivorism when he was quite young and witnessed its excellence while enjoying it. The strength of his friendship is like an oak in the forest, growing in beauty for 80 years. Well, thank you very much for listening. I am going to um, ask you, let me get out of the slideshow here. Please feel free to unmute as you will if you have questions. Um,
Hi, I have a few questions. Um, Very interesting. I missed the talk in Pittsburgh, so I was very happy to see that you were going to redo it today. Thank you.
yes,
Um, I don't have a general picture, and sometimes your sound went in and out, so I may have missed something, but it was formed by people who could afford the monthly, or even though it was a very low amount. And the money went to their own members in times of hardship, for example, illness, and they couldn't work, that sort of thing.
yes.
And that was that it, and that no money went to people outside the group.
No, in as far as I can tell, outside of some cultural events that they sponsored,
Hmm.
and as I said, one of their missions also was to promote Welsh culture and the Welsh language. That was sort of that was a double mission. But no, they didn't. They didn't. I believe that in Wales they may have done this, but from what I have seen from the American Ivorites, it was very focused on uh, when it came to sort of the health insurance and sick pay aspect of this, it
Yeah.
was just for the members. And
Okay.
I think if they had
Okay.
a little bit of money left over, that would be, or they would perhaps there were members who made a special donation to
Yeah.
support, an Eisteddfod or
Mm.
or to help organize an event like that.
I'm sure it also helped form or strengthen some Welsh societies around as well, like in Utica and things where there were people getting together in places
Yes,
like Utica.
yes,
Yeah.
I think one of the things I noticed though is I feel like I sense that they were somewhat of an exclusive group in a sense because they had very high standards for membership. So it wasn't the same as necessarily a date St. David's Society um, yeah, or even just obviously belonging to a church and participating
Mm.
in Welsh cultural activities that way, uh, because they had they had these age restrictions, they had some health requirements, and they also had standards of they you had to be a person of that they judged as being of good enough character to join,
Right.
which I'm sure that most people would have been able to do, but nevertheless, I think that, I do wonder if that also may have affected their membership in terms of maybe making some people doubt whether they could join.
Mm. Thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions?
I I do. My picture isn't available, but I think I read or heard that the National Health Plan for Britain was based on the uh, probably like the Ivorites. The man who developed it was Welsh, and so he knew about the care and process.
Well, I think you're right in the sense I don't know. I'm afraid I don't know the exact details of that, but obviously, and I mean, Aneurin Bevan, of course, was Welsh, and he was. I think he was motivated uh, by these sort of traditions among working people that were very strong in industrial South Wales. These sort of societies. So I think yes, you can see the Ivorites as a predecessor and other organizations like them. There were lots of different ones, not just the Ivorites, particularly in Britain. You can see them as a sort of a precursor to the national, national sort of some sort of national health insurance, as was developed and ultimately, put into practice under the Labour government with the Nairn and Bevan's hard work. So yes, I think there is a connection there, and I do think that those traditions played a role in inspiring the Nairn and Bevan. Yes.
Robert, I have a question.
Yes.
I'm wondering if there was any kind of religious denomination affiliation, or was it just a very non-denominational group?
Well, they specifically tried to, they explicitly were non-denominational and and apolitical as well. So they did not, you didn't have to be a member of a particular church. I mean, I think as part of the good character, they generally they would have only accepted people who were probably a member of some church, but they were non-denominational, and so and that was part of their mission too, was to sort of bring all Welsh people together. So I mean, they were exclusive in the sense too that I mean they were exclusively for Welsh people in the United States. Um, and of course, they sort of self-selected by initially, at least, by being Welsh speaking. Um, if I can digress from because I do want to bring up a point, and this is not about religion but about language, which is that in the late 19th century, as the Welsh language was starting to decline in some places, and there was a new generation of Welsh of American-born Welsh-Americans, we actually see the establishment of a couple of English-speaking lodges. So they're Ivorite lodges where the language is English, and this is before the rest of the Ivorite lodges eventually turned to English because people weren't speaking Welsh anymore. This is before that, in the late 1800s. I think there was one called the Thomas Jefferson Lodge, for example. So, and the idea was to be a little bit more inclusive of this sort of newer generation that maybe was turning away from the language. Um, but just to go back again, religion, they would not attach to any particular denomination.
Was there a temperance component to this?
That is a good question. I think I haven't seen anything specifically related to temperance. Again, I think that and that doesn't seem to be a cause that they were particularly concerned with in it, but it may, again, the way that they self-selected for people of good character may have meant that it wasn't something that they, again, and the other part of that too is, of course, temperance was also a political cause. And so, and there were degrees of temperance and prohibition, and so again, that would have been something that probably they stayed out of, outside of ensuring that the people who were members of their lodge were people of good character. I mean, they didn't want somebody joining who was who was alcoholic and injuring themselves or getting or unwell. I mean, unhealthy. So yes, that's a good question, but it doesn't seem to have been, at least as far as I've seen, a major a major concern that there wasn't an issue that they really sort of fought for in the public space.
I thought it was interesting that the women were organized in Utica, New York, which may have something to do with their organizing.
Yes, well, and that's the thing, is that there were again, it was initially a men's organization, but But then, we see these women's lodges being established, and also the women's and men's lodges would. I mean, they were not. They would even though they were separate lodges, separate organizations, they would come together and socialize and hold events together. So they weren't sort of fully segregated. Um, but
Were the women to do the cooking?
that's
Probably serve coffee
that
or cookies.
that's a really good question. I don't know if there may well have been some sort of division of labor there that but I think actually probably, I mean, with again, from the little bits and pieces that I've seen, it seems like their activities were a little bit more domestic and and more stereotypical of what women were expected to do at the time, and they were sort of striving um, for an ideal of womanhood, just as the men's lodges were trying to sort of idealize Welsh manhood. So I think there is some, yeah, I think there was some there were some different focuses for the men and the women in their activities.
I would imagine the men and women, because of transportation, met at the same time, but maybe they went into different rooms and then joined afterwards for lunch or whatever they called it.
I think that's probably the case. I don't know for sure, but that would make sense. Particularly in a city where people were spread out, particularly in cities like Chicago or even and maybe in Utica as well, where people had to come some distance. Yes, I'm sure that they coordinated those events. So Susan, you had a question.
Yeah. I'm interested in the very beginning. You talked about David ap Gwilym, the poet, um, having an influence on the Ivorites. So could you go through that again for me?
So yes, the name Ivorites comes from Ivor Hael, who was a Welsh a Welsh lord in South Wales, a Welsh aristocrat in South Wales, in near today's Newport, actually, um,
Hmm.
in the 14th century, and he was one of the patrons of Dafydd ap Gwilym. So one of the
Oh.
people that who paid Dafydd ap Gwilym to write poetry about and for him, to praise him, and um, and so I think it's a testament to how well read and well educated, um, even working people in early 19th century Wales were. That it was a shoemaker who who um, who established this order and named it after Ivor Hael. And it also comes, of course, in the wake of a real revival of interest in medieval and early Welsh literature that was supported by and promoted by Iolo Morgannwg, for example. So, there was a burgeoning Eisteddfod movement in the first half of the 19th century in Wales. There were big Eisteddfodau in Abergavenny, for example. And so there was a lot of interest in Welsh literature, and medieval Welsh literature in particular. And I think um, and so that is where the name Ivorites comes from Ivor Hael, Dafydd ap Gwilym's patron.
Okay. Thank you so much for having a talk by one of our members who's an author and Welsh translator. Not a natural born Welsh speaker, but fluent now. And he has a book on Dafydd ap Gwilym's poetry, so it caught my ear. And he's going to be speaking at our St. David's Day lunch. But
Oh, wonderful.
we'll have it on our website afterwards as a recording if anybody would like to watch that about Dafydd ap Gwilym. And our website would be I'm sorry, Welsh, WNE.org.
May I ask who the speaker is?
Sorry, John Bollard.
Oh yes, yes. I have
Dr.
his.
John Bollard. They
I
they
have.
live in Massachusetts, work at Smith College. So we have a lot of connections with Smith College through different Welsh things. And he and his wife are authors and poets and translators and medieval Welsh, you know. Yeah. Yeah. And
Wonderful.
he was always welcome to, he's always willing, he and his wife to do Zooms and things. So if you ever want to get in touch with him, try it.
Well, thank you. Are there other questions? I have a few other thoughts to share, if you would like to hear them.
I just had a quick comment,
Yes.
Robert. Since you so kindly mentioned the Madoc Lodge and the Lynyrd Lodge in Chicago, we had a member of our society, Lynyrd Williams, as she was, became Oppenheim, who was born soon after the foundation of the Lynyrd Lodge and named for the lodge, not the other way around. I understood. I always thought for us that reminded us of that in Chicago, that there was this lodge and that's where her name came from. A strong Welsh family, and her cousins, I believe, were in the Madoc Lodge, the Williamses. So, you know, we were reminded of that name. So it's a nice tie to that time, even though they were long gone by the time many of us joined the Welsh societies in Chicago.
Yes, and I think it's important to mention too that, Dilys, you are with the what was until recently the Cambrian Benevolent Society.
Yes.
Um,
Now the Welsh Cambrian, now the Welsh Cambrian, so
and
that we can identify more readily as Welsh.
and and that was that was founded in a similar spirit to the Ivorites,
Mhm.
if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, that was founded in 1853, so predates those lodges, but there were very many other Welsh organizations, all kinds, as you're saying. You know, sometimes they would be for literature or the performing side of what Wales, the Welsh culture, things like that. For people who are a bit more academic, there would be other organizations. So Chicago was well supplied with Welsh societies, and those two lodges, the Ivorite lodges in Chicago, were just one of two of many that we had in the city during that time. So it was flourishing during that time, a lot of Welsh activity.
I wanted to I also wanted to mention, because going through the Madoc Lodge records, I've been looking to see where they actually met, and
Mhm.
I know that in Wales there is at least one purpose-built Ivorite building in Ammanford, and that I'm aware of, and I believe there may have been others. But in America, it seems like for the most part, certainly with the Chicago Lodge, they seem to have rented space
Mm.
in the city at various locations, and it changed over the years. So they were meeting in various locations. They didn't have a permanent um, building. Or single location. There isn't an Ivorites Hall in Chicago, for example,
Oh.
and there weren't in other places. And I do want to stress too that just reading that 1917 history of the Ivorites, and actually I think I can pull it out here and show you that book. So oh no, it's not going to let me. There you go. You can sort of see it there. The it actually a lot of these lodges were short-lived. And I think that, they might come into existence for a few years and then they were sort of folded up because perhaps the Welsh people either lost interest or people moved away from that community to work somewhere else. It was a very mobile Welsh immigrant community in the United States at that time, and people were always moving around. So yes, it was. If you're looking for an Ivorites Hall, I believe, and maybe I don't know if Janice up there in New York and Vermont can attest to this, but I believe there was a building that became an Ivorites Hall, maybe in Granville. So, but generally they were sort of located in they would sort of rent space and meet in different places as space was available. Um, so anyway, I'm kind of rambling here, and just want to see there are a couple of comments in here. Okay, Janice is saying there was no building, so I may be mistaken there. So um, the name author of the book about the Ivorites that you mentioned. So the book, and um, I may have to turn off my. Well, anyway, the book is something that I found online, and this is not working well, is it? Um, but let me see here. All right. Okay. So
Yep.
it is in Welsh. It was published in 1917. I found it on a used book website. And once I'm done with all of my research, I will be depositing it in the archives of the Great Plains Welsh Heritage Centre. But it's called, Yr Urdd Iforaidd Americanaidd I Hanes am Hanner Can Mlynedd. The Order of American Ivorites, their history for 50 years, and it's by a John O. Thomas. It was published in Utica, New York, in 1917, and it's about it's 96 pages, and I'll show you just this is sort of it's very detailed. It gives a lot of the history of the various presidents, officers, and then it has a lot of information about finances in the back. And it lists every lodge that had been established and disestablished up to that point in 1917. So it's really the kind of a history of the golden years of the Order of American True Ivorites. So that's a very useful source for learning about them. I've only found that one copy. Maybe there's a way that in the future that we could even digitize it or make it available for people. It is in Welsh, so it is not translated, which might be an obstacle for some. But the other thing that we do have in the archive are reports. These came to us through the Madoc Lodge collection. We have reports of the annual convention of the Ivorites, the national convention, which were usually they were held in somewhere in Pennsylvania or New York, and those give a lot of details about every lodge had to submit a report on their activities and their finances, and it's a very detailed picture of in many ways not just the Ivorites but the Welsh-American community during this period. Yes, I agree. Fred, it would be good. It would be good if that book could be digitized online. Janice says again, no building in the Vermont, New York Slate Valley area that she's aware of, but they did meet in chapels and other sites. So yes, churches. I believe the and maybe it was the Benevolent Society in Chicago that met at the Hebron Church.
Yeah,
but
we had a long-standing relationship with the church, and so that occurred to me too. That they were often using the church building as a place to meet. Well, since the Ivorites were clearly not affiliated with any particular religious group, that wouldn't have been an option for them. They would have had to pick somewhere that was not religious in any way, I would think.
Well,
so
I think one of the things that about Welsh churches, I mean, depending upon the church, of course, and where they were located and what was going on in the community and how different denominations felt about each other, there was quite a bit of sharing of resources, particularly in places where one church had been established, but another congregation hadn't, hadn't raised the funds yet to build their own church. So I think something was similar probably happened in some places with the Ivorites. I think they preferred to be obviously they preferred to be seen as non-denominational, but they may well have, I'm guessing, in some places met in churches. And again, that's not something that's always very clear from the records. It is clear in the Madoc Lodge records, because it says where they had their meeting. We have those, and it will mention one of the interesting one of the locations. I did a little bit of research to look up and see, what that address was and what was there. And I found that at another time that particular those particular rooms had been used by a Jewish organization. So there was this was obviously a very multi-ethnic city, and they were sort of, they were moving with all of these different ethnic organizations. And that's a thing that is also important to remember, and I think that they within in the immigrant community, I think they took on an additional role that they didn't have in Wales, of being of representing an immigrant community, and providing some comfort and identity to people who were otherwise sort of away from home and in a different society. So I think that's an important aspect. There's a question here from Janice. So Janice says, the marker at the cemetery monument is what I'm curious to know if other group cemeteries have them, and did they once hold a small flag or banner? The ones in our Vermont cemeteries have a hole in the back of the face which accommodates small flags, and some people stick American flags in them. So I don't, if you may have noticed in the slideshow, there was a little metal flag holder and actually Janice Edwards had very kindly sent that to me and gave me permission to put it in my slideshow. And so if you are aware, or if you ever see those, please let me know. Please let Janice at the Welsh-American Genealogical Society know, because she is wondering, and I'm wondering too, if those were used anywhere else. Again, there's nothing that I've seen yet in the Madoc records that mentions them, but they may have just been used regionally or in one or two places. But there were all sorts of, perhaps I think there were all sorts of little projects too that they embarked on for their members. And it's probable that these flag holders, getting these flag holders made was one of those special projects, maybe by one lodge or one group of lodges. And I will say too that one thing which I have found as I continue to research the Ivorites is that in the 1870s or so, there was some chatter among the Ivorites about trying to establish a sort of Ivorite colony in the American West. And this was a time when there were companies that were being founded by Welsh people to buy up land, particularly land that had belonged to the railroads. This railroad land was being sold for people to settle. So there were companies of prominent Welsh businessmen who were getting together and is buying land. Places like Arvonia, Kansas, for example. Bala, Kansas is another place. And I think there was a similar there was some chatter about this among and some discussion in the pages of a Drych about the Ivorites establishing their own sort of little Welsh colony out in the West, but nothing seems to have come of that. And also the Ivorites don't seem to have been very present outside of either big cities or the eastern states, and particularly Pennsylvania, the industrialized areas. Well, does anybody else have any questions? I've been answering questions. I've also been rambling a little bit, which I am wont to do, and
I'd
because
like
this
to
is
just
such an
make a
interesting
comment.
subject.
If I
Yes,
could just
Sandy.
make a comment. This week, I'm in Arizona now instead of Illinois, but this week on Secrets of the Dead, there was a section on King Arthur
Mm.
and that archaeology work that's being done. Is it Tintagel? Is that the right word?
Tintagel. Tintagel
Tintagel.
in
Okay.
Cornwall. Yes, yes.
Yeah. So anyway, I thought it was very interesting, of course, because they're trying to pursue, of course, if this is really Arthur's birth. And the scenery is fabulous and the content is very interesting. So I would suggest Secrets of the Dead, and the theme is King Arthur.
Well, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Yes, I will say that my wife and I have been watching lots of a television program on you, it's just now on YouTube called Time Team, which is an archaeology program from with and there are quite a few episodes that were made in Wales as well, which which relate specifically to Welsh history and prehistory. So yes, completely separate from the Ivorites here, but yes, thank you for the recommendation.
Sure. Interesting.
All right, well, I'd like to thank everybody. Diolch yn fawr iawn am ymuno gyda fi. Um, a byddaf yn ôl cyn bo hir. I'll be back again soon. We have let's see, if you are in the Wymore, Lincoln, Nebraska, perhaps even Kansas City area and want to come on um, actually on March the 9th in at the Great Plains Welsh Heritage Center, we are having our what we could consider we'll sort of consider this our St. David's Day open day from 2 to 5 p.m. And I am going to be presenting a talk about Welsh and people, Welsh people and people of Welsh ancestry in early Hollywood. So the era of silent film. There are some interesting stories that relate to the very early film industry. This is because every year in early March there is a celebration in Gage County, Nebraska, of the silent film star Harold Lloyd, who was of Welsh ancestry, going back a couple of generations, but uh, we've always made that connection, and so the local film society is going to come to the museum, and I'm going to give a presentation, and I will probably put that presentation um, out on Zoom sometime. We'll probably have a virtual version of that. Um, I have something planned for February the 23rd. We have a new board member, Hugh Weber, who lives in Colorado. He has a master's degree in history uh, from Boston University, I believe. And he is going to be giving a talk about 19th century Welsh politics. And so I will be distributing information about that event shortly. We also have another Zoom coming up on March 23rd, and that is with uh, that is going to be about St. David. So I will keep you informed of all those, and there's a question here about I always put the Zoom link in my calendar. Is it possible to get the Zoom link posted? Yes. Well, Dilys, um, I've gone back and forth on that because I know sometimes um, malicious people can get hold of uh, Zoom links and interfere, which I don't want to happen. But if I can find a way to make it more accessible and I feel confident, then I will go ahead and do that. But So far, I feel like it's been more secure this way, but let me do some research and see if we're okay just kind of distributing it out there, putting it out there just so people can join whenever they want. So thank you. Diolch yn fawr. Really appreciate the turnout today and the great questions. I'm continuing to do this research on the Ivorites, and I look forward to sharing it with more people in the future. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you. Thank you.